The storm sanded a man down to his bones. Up on the Mogollon Rim, the world was one color: steel sky, white ground, and my breath rising as I swung them all. I kept to winter circuits: split, stack, feed the stove, sweep the stoop so drifts wouldn't pin the door. War taught me the safety of sameness. After the cavalry and the graves without markers, I learned there's peace in things that don't move. The Winchester leaned where it always leaned. The kettle ticked toward boil. A wool coat hung behind the door. When the figure came out of the white, it announced itself by silence. The pines cut their whisper, ravens went dumb, and then a darker smear staggered along the fence, vanished, reappeared by the woodpile, and fell at the porch steps that I didn't move. Decoys are a craft out here, one body pitching in the open while the rest crouched behind the rise. The window glass was fogged, but I made out bare legs under a hem filmed with ice. No boots. Hair in a black knot rhymed white. She crawled the last foot with her head down, as if under a low door. Her hand found the bottom plank and tapped twice. Not hard, just enough to say a heart still beat. I held my breath to hear beyond the wind. Nothing but the scratch of branches and the hush of snow. No horse snort, no leather creak, no cocked hammer. "Let me in," she said. Lips clumsy, cheeks stone. "I'll reward you." The words were more air than sound, a bargain tossed into the storm. Fear is sensible. It has kept me through worse than winters. But I was raised under a rule that never died. You don't let a creature freeze on your stoop. I set the safety, lifted the latch, and wedged the door so the gale didn't take it. The cold came in like a living thing. She was lighter than the coat behind the door. When I gathered her, she felt made of sticks and wet denim, heatless as a bucket left out overnight. Her feet were raw meat polished by ice. She tried to stand and couldn't. Her head found my collarbone and stayed, breath small and quick. "Easy," I said. I kicked the door shut, swung her across my arms, and carried her to the hearth. The kettle screamed as the fire threw orange. I set her on the braided rug within its circle, close enough to warm without burning. She turned her face from the light like it hurt. Habit checked the window and the peg. No tracks beyond hers cut into the drift. No shapes at the fence line. Just the storm and the two of us breathing. The hard thought still came. She could be bait, and I the fool. Another rose under it like the hot side of a brand. If she dies here because I guarded myself, I'll forfeit this roof. Caution is a shell a man can live in. Compassion is the crack that lets winter through. I set the rifle within reach, fetched salt and a clean rag. "You're inside," I told her, meaning more than the room. "You'll live." Her eyes opened a slit. Not fear, just the dull knowledge of a body done making heat. That look put the war taste back in my mouth. I slid her nearer, pulled blankets over her shoulders, and felt some old hinge click. Whatever lay outside, ambush or none, I'd chosen my side. I wouldn't let a stranger die on my doorstep. Not today. Not ever. Steam shouldered the kettle lid as I dragged a washtub to the hearth. You don't blast heat into frostbitten flesh, you invite it. I cooled water from boil to warm, salted it, touched a little honey to it, and cut my spare shirt into strips. Survival outranks shame. Her dress crackled with ice. No boots to free, only feet the color of butcher trimmings. I didn't rub, never rub frozen flesh, but sank each foot into the brine. The first touch woke a tremor, then a shiver that traveled from heel to jaw. Good. Shivering meant the stove inside wasn't dead. "Drink," I said, sweetening snowmelt and bracing it with a whisper of whiskey. She sipped careful and grateful. I set a pan of coals under the blankets at her belly. "You warm the core first, or the cold in the blood steals the heart." "Were you traveling alone?" I asked, because silence can lock a person in worse than weather. Her mouth shaped the words as if she'd rehearsed them to the trees. "Cast out," she said. 2 days. No boots. Cast out. The phrase stood in the room like a third figure. Not lost. Not widowed. Cast out. The ambush map I'd been drawing in my head fell apart. No outlaw strips a decoy to bare feet and throws her to a blizzard. My fear slid aside and something older rose. The anger I'd known under tents when blame was handed to whoever couldn't answer back. "What's your name?" I asked Lena. "Ethan," I said, in case names might nail us to the same floorboard. "You're safe here through the blow, and after if you need." Her eyes flinched at that. like someone unpracticed at being promised. The shivers steadied. Pink crept back into her toes. I hooded the lantern and checked the window. Only her tracks. Already blurring, I found a small beaded pouch under her sash and set it where she could see it. Trust is a latch, one click at a time. I ladled bone broth, cooled it with a pinch of snow, and fed her 3 slow spoonfuls. Color returned to her mouth. The room found its shapes, the coat peg, the map, and with them came thinking about duty. Instead of danger. Why would they cast you out? I asked before I could bite it back. Because, she said, staring at the stove, I could not give what was asked. She swallowed. I walked until the snow took the trail. 2 sons. No food. I put the spoon down before I snapped the handle. I knew the feel of a leader hiding failure in somebody else's skin. Not your doing, I said, offering only the proof of her face. Eat. Warm. The bed by the fire is yours. She nodded without letting the tears fall. Wind leaned at the logs. Inside, the kettle ticked and her tremble thinned to thread. I lifted her feet, patted them dry, painted the cracks with honey, wrapped them neat, and eased wool socks over the bandages. She made a small sound, half pain, half disbelief. You'll sleep, I told her. I'll watch a while. Ethan, she repeated, testing if the name would stay. Lena, I answered, to show it would that I moved the rifle closer out of habit, but the arithmetic that ruled my days went quiet. Whatever brought her here wasn't a scheme to solve first. It was a wrong to meet with a stove, salt water, and a promise said plain. The storm fell to a tired sift. The cabin kept its own weather, sap hissing in the stove, the kettle ticking. Lena slept hard, waking only to eat. Her feet purpled, then flushed pink, her body deciding to return. I trimmed what skin let go, and left what didn't, changing dressings morning and night, be why the second sunrise her voice held. Her silences weren't empty, they were fences. When she let me unfasten her outer dress to dry it, I saw what the whiteout had hidden. Quill work tight as writing, pearled patterns, a belt with a carved bone awl, a beaded pouch of cedar and ochre. Who were you to them? I asked, careful as easing a jammed shell. She studied the fire. Wife, she said, to the one who speaks for the others. The chief, I said. She nodded. I went into his house with songs. They braided my hair. With shell. I was told to be patient, quiet, strong. Moon after moon, no child. The singing went small. Old women spoke hard in corners. Men looked away so I would not see pity. When winter hunting failed, they added my emptiness to hunger. She lifted her palm, counting what could not be counted. He could not be blamed. His voice must not be made small. So they made me small instead. I'd seen that trick in other uniforms. When a leader falters, pour the loss into someone who cannot answer back. Heat rose in me, clean as a new brand. Lena, I said, you weren't the winter. Her eyes measured me. No, she said. I was not. She asked for my knife. I hesitated, not at the steel, but at the promise a handle means. She sat on the stool, blanket round her shoulders, and unbound her braid. It fell heavy and black now the rime had melted. She stroked. It once like telling a long road goodbye. In my mother's house, she said, we cut hair for grief, or for beginning. You don't have to, I said. I do, she said. She found the place just below the nape where old hands had started it on her wedding morning and cut in 2 firm draws. The sound was small, letting go rarely wants an echo. She set the severed length on the mantle beside the cedar, a soft black coil at rest. We singed the stubble over a bowl with cedar to sweeten the smell. Ash drifted and fell. Without the braid, she looked younger and older both. No ceremony left to hide behind. Only a face that had chosen to live. From now, she said, combing her short hair with her fingers, I belong to my own work. Oh, right, I said, and met vow with plan. I slid the bunk nearer the stove, strung a drying line, boiled needles, mixed bare fat with pine for salve, carved a crutch so she could reach the privy without crawling drifts. I notched each day, pulse strong, appetite good, color returning. She tried the crutch, laughed once, then learned its rhythm. We ate together, quiet and real. When she slept, her hands uncurled. When she woke, she did not ask permission to stand. Rescue ends. Something else begins. By the 3rd night, the house no longer felt like mine with a guest. It felt like ours. with a purpose. Her braid on the mantle wasn't loss, but ledger, an open page we would write with heat, salt, broth, and the stubbornness of two people who refused to be made small. By the fourth day, the storm stopped acting like a judge and turned into weather again. Edges softened, icicles ticked, drips carved caves along the eaves, snow sighed and settled. We opened the door and let the cabin breathe. Lena stepped into the yard in my boots while bandaged feet remembered ground. She moved like someone returning from a country with different rules. Careful, glad. Work reintroduced us. I hauled. She sorted kindling with a mason's logic. She stitched a torn sleeve of mine without asking, the needle singing. She scoured my skillet with sand and fat until it shone. With the knife at her belt and that new short hair, she didn't look like a guest. She looked like the place had been waiting on her to arrive. I was not the one, she said at the woodpile, voice level the way truth is level. He is old. His strength is for speaking and seeing roads, not for lying with women. But a leader cannot be made small. So women were told to be smaller around him. No complaint, just a line cut clean. The mothers brewed teas, warmed stones. When no child came, songs went quiet. Then they sang about enemies instead. If you sing about enemies long enough, you will find one. I was closest, and I did not fight back. I leaned on the maul. If a cradle stays empty, that lives in his years, not your bones. She held the words a moment, then nodded once, as if a weight had been named and could now be put down. Dignity rose in her like heat off noon rock, quiet and sure. I cleared a corner by the east window and chalked a line. A room, I said. Yours if you want it. I want it, she said, and I will earn it. We pried boards from the collapsed line shack, sledged them home, straightened nails for second lives. She swung a hammer with economy. I set posts and sill. She learned the English names. I learned hers, until our talk sounded like a fence built from two kinds of wood. A blue wool coat lay in a cedar chest under my bed, stitched by hands that no longer turned doorknobs. I had kept it the way men keep anchors. I lifted it out, folded the ghost small, and set the coat on Lena's shoulders. The wool met her like it had been waiting. What is its story? She asked. My wife's, I said. The words were not a wound. They were a grave well tended. Fever took her. Lena's eyes went soft. No pity, only regard. Then I will keep it warm in her name, she said. When the small room stood, plank walls chinked tight, a window watching birch. Spring was thinking about the valley. We walked the ridge to check traps and snares. Wind combed her short hair. In the blue coat, she looked positioned, not borrowed. I am not leaving, she said. Not a plea, a pledge. I answered by touching my brow to hers, the way meaning is carried when words feel clumsy. She breathed out, and our days rearranged. When our mouths met, it was not hunger but thanks. That night by the fire we moved around each other without hurry, two lives agreeing. I banked coals. She banked her head against my shoulder. Necessity had put us under a roof. Choice nailed the boards. Nights changed first. Not the work, that stayed sunlit and honest, but the way the house breathed after dark. We learned each other's noises, my tiny whistle by the lamp, her click of tongue measuring flour, pitch popping in the fire. The new room had a latch. It stayed open. Privacy was not a secret. It was permission. On my terms, Lena said the night we chose to share the bed, not merely offer it. She sat cross-legged on the quilt, the blue coat folded at her feet. I was made a vessel for a man's proof. Never again. I will be myself. I will be loved as myself. The words steadied me. War had used up the part that wants to win or take. What remained wanted a room no one had to escape. All right, I said. Teach me your terms. They will change, she said. Then I will ask, I said. And I will listen. We made rules we could say in the dark. No hands unless asked. No asking unless an answer could be no. Speak before we touched, and afterward, too. Stop if either of us reached for the old silences. The first time felt less like crossing a line and more like taking off a pack. I asked, here, and moved only when she guided me there. When her palms settled over my heart, years slid away like noon snow off a pine. She laughed once, surprised, and we learned each other's pace. Careful, then clumsy, then still. There is a rhythm no preacher can script. We found it by listening. When the lamp went out, the dark felt full. I slept through until hawks woke the ridge, The first winter in years without a bugle in my head. Morning made our boundaries strong instead of fragile. She pulled my shirt on to fetch water because she wanted my smell, not because my shirt was owed. I kept my hands to myself because I wanted her hands again, not from fear. We worked with a lightness that had nothing to do with jokes. Quiet did not punish. It rested. She showed me bread braiding and how to warm stones for the bed. I showed her how to oil the Henry and read cloud edges for wind. When she wanted to shoot, she said so. I set a tin on a stump and stood behind her because she asked. She hit it on her third breath out and grinned. Again, she said. And we did until the stump apologized in splinters. That night we returned to the bed because we wanted to. Some nights we found each other with a yes that needed no drumbeat. Her terms were not a gate to guard. They were a path that held our weight. Each morning we woke in a house where neither of us was made small so the other could seem large. I am not a symbol, she said once, setting a bowl down. Not for my people. Not for you. For me. I said, you are Lena, who keeps the coat warm, the stove honest, and the truth straight. That is enough. We had built something that didn't shine, because it wouldn't blind us. It would last by being ordinary and chosen, the way water lasts by being water. Outside, snow-crusted. Inside, the bed took our shapes without claiming rights. If you passed our window and saw a lamp, you might have said, a man and a woman share a cabin. You'd be right and miss the most important thing. We shared the choosing, and we renewed it at night and again at dawn. Late winter settled into peace. Days lined up like tools. Haul, split, mend, check the close snares, and leave the far ones to foxes. The new room smelled of pine and wool. Sage hung above the window, she noticed first, lying under the blue coat. She counted with breath, not fingers. Ethan, she said, quiet as handling a skittish horse, my moon has not come. Hope is thin glass. We didn't toast it. Another week passed. The hardness around her eyes let go. At the table we counted flour and wood the way you do before a drive. If it is so, she said, then the work must change. It will. I said, we'll pull the bed to the hearth. I'll lay in more wood. You keep the short line. And we make a place for small feet, she said, almost smiling, then hiding it. I cut willow where the creek bends. Steam bent ribs over the kettle, shavings drifted at my boots. She plaited rawhide, jaw set like braiding a prayer. We lined the basket with cloth from my spare shirt. Her palm found the rim and let one long breath go. Proof is a word men use to win and make others small. We didn't want proof, we wanted a life. Still, when her blood did not come a third week, relief stepped in like sun through cloud. The old blame had lived in her bones like a tenant. Now it had to pack. Not failure, I said. Not failure. She answered that we quieted our talk, in case the ridge was listening. I moved traps into the drawer so I could check them before breakfast. She stayed close and sang without words, a tune that did not drop even when a pan clattered. One night, she drew on rawhide with charcoal. A letter, she said. She marked the ridge, the creek's S, the lightning-split stump everyone knew. She printed the English I'd taught, simple lines a trader could carry without reading her heart. I wrote the rest plain. A woman you love is safe and warm. If you would answer, leave what only she would know at the stump where the road bends. What thing? I asked. She looked at the blue coat, then her cut hair. Red, she said. A sash my mother weaves when girls begin. I began twice. We wrapped the note in oiled cloth inside a tobacco tin. 2 days later, Jim Carter came with coffee and lies. I traded him a haunch to leave the tin where it must go. Half-mile east of the village, I said. Lightning stump. If they won't let you near, throw and ride. He grinned like a man who has thrown worse. After he left, the house felt like a held breath. We didn't ask whether the tin would be found or burned. We kept to staying. I chinked the room tight, pegged a shelf low for little hands, stitched tiny shirts, each poor and better than the last. At dusk, she walked the yard with a palm curved at her middle like guarding a candle. Some nights we spoke to what might be coming, about storms and fences, about listening before talking, about choosing. We didn't promise safety we couldn't give. We promised not to turn hard at the same time, that we never said happiness out loud. We built it, board by board, loaf by loaf, until the cabin hummed with the quiet yes of new life. Spring declared itself with drips, First a timid tick under the eaves, then a runnel braiding into the yard. Juncos replaced the winter hush. I took down storm boards. Lena propped the door and let the blue coat drink sun. She walked the yard with that cupped palm, smiling without showing teeth that we pretended not to watch the ridge for 3 days. On the fourth, after coffee and fence wire, we saddled the mare and rode toward the lightning stump. Snow had sunk too. Rag and shadow, the world showed damp browns. Every hoofstep sounded like a question. I left the mare where the trail breaks. We climbed the last stretch on foot. The stump waited, ugly, faithful. I was ready for nothing, or worse. The tin crushed, a boot print ground over it, the certainty of silence. Lena stopped 6 paces shy and touched my sleeve. "Let me see first," she said in an tin. A strip of cloth looped to a splinter so it would stream without leaving. Red, not a trader's rag, but tight work the color of iron at sunset, with a single bead at one end, blue in a white ring. I didn't know the bead story. Lena did. Breath left her like she'd been holding it since girlhood. "She remembers me," she said. Her fingers didn't snatch. She lifted the sash with both hands and laid it over her forearms the way you carry something living. She touched the bead and stood long enough for the wind to change in a message written. None needed. If a village wants you ghosted, it sends the cold of its back. If a mother wants you remembered, she sends work from her hands that we sat with our backs to the stump, the sash between us. I did not ask if Lena would ride the rest of the way. She did not ask me to speak for or against. The choice lay in the red and the road. She looked from one to the other and then back to me. "I am seen," she said. "I am not returning to be made small." "Then we make it here." I said that we took the long way home. The sash rode her shoulders like a small banner. Meltwater chattered over rock. It felt like riding under a gate we'd built out of weather, and while at dusk, I set my mother's ring on the table. A thin gold band I had carried in a tobacco tin since fever buried one life, and then another. "I don't have a preacher," I said. "I have this, and what I can say plain." Lena wrapped the red once at her waist. She held the ring. "No songs," she said. "No witnesses to take our words and make them theirs. Just us." I said that we stood by the hearth because it was our first church. I said, "I choose you when work is easy and when it stings. I will not make you smaller so I feel big. I will ask and listen. I will leave room for your no." She slipped the ring on and answered, "I choose you when plans break and when bread rises. I will not turn hard on the same day you do. I will keep truth straight even when it costs us supper." Then she added what mattered most. "I keep myself," she said, "and I give from there." We touched foreheads. Outside, Juncos argued. Inside, a red thread joined blue wool and gold. Spring took the valley without asking permission. Snow retreated into the timber like a guilty thing. Creek water found its old voice and went on talking. The cabin stopped being a shelter and became a home. You could see it in small proofs, too. Pairs of boots by the door, not one. Her short comb on the shelf next to my oil can. The red sash looped over the east window, so morning poured through it and made a warm stripe on the floorboards. Her braid still slept on the mantle like a snake that had chosen to be rope. The blue coat hung on its peg, ready, not haunted, that we built normal like a corral, post by post. The willow cradle I'd bent over steam waited by the hearth with a quilt. Lena backed an old shirt cloth. I pegged a low shelf for tiny bowls and whittled a little spoon smooth as river stone. She sewed shirts that made me laugh with pride because they looked like me, only honest. We didn't talk about fear at night. We let the day's work be louder. One evening the creek sounded nearer than it was, the way sound carries when everything agrees. I set a plank in the door to plane the edge and said the question I'd been carrying around like a dollar you don't want to lose. "Will you be my wife?" Lena looked up from mending and smiled like I'd asked if the lamp was lit. "I already am," she said. "But if you want your yes to have a place to live, carve it where we can touch it." So I took a chisel to the lintel and set our names side by side. Mine in clumsy big letters, hers in both scripts, the English we shared and the marks her mother taught. We pressed our palms to the cut wood and stood there until it felt like a door beam and a promise were the same thing. The day labor began. The weather didn't bother to make drama of it. Rain freckled the yard. Juncos argued on the fence. Water found her, and she looked at me with a steadiness I'd seen when she cut her hair. The plans we'd made stood up like handled tools. I stoked the stove, boiled water, set hot stones at the foot of the bed. She tied the red sash high to keep it out of the way, then loosened it when the work turned fierce. I learned how to be big without taking space, how to be useful without command. Her hands found mine when they wanted them and pushed them away when they didn't. We remembered to breathe the way we taught each other to breathe before squeezing a trigger. Dawn made the window silver. She went quiet in that terrifying way the courageous do, and then the room cracked open as a cry entered it. Sharp, angry, perfect. I caught our child awkward and sure, slippery as a trout, but heavier with meaning than anything I'd ever held. Girl, warm as bread, hair black as the cut braid, a mouth already rehearsing the right to speak. Lena took her and looked not surprised, but satisfied, like a promise kept by no one but herself that we wrapped the little one in the quilt and set her in the willow. Lena fell asleep with her hand on the basket. I banked the fire and stood uselessly happy for a long time. The kind of happiness that doesn't feel like winning so much as belonging inside the same weather as someone else. Later I walked to the lightning stump with the mare and left a new bundle. A twist of hair, a scrap of the quilt's cloth, and a red thread tied to a note that said only, "She is safe." If something waited there next week or next year, we would be glad. If not, we would still be whole. We weren't measuring our life by replies anymore. Back home, the day went on. I split wood softer so she wouldn't wake quick. The creek talked. A hawk sketched loops. Inside, Lena dozed and the baby hiccuped like a small engine learning. When they woke, I said the line that had started all of this without knowing it was a proposal. "Let me in." Lena smiled, tired and blazing. "You are," she said, and lifted the baby so my daughter's fist could find my thumb. Her grip was ridiculous, tiny and absolute. The house made the sound of 3 people breathing. The door stood unlatched because it could. We had written our thesis into the beams. Compassion opens the door. Agency decides who steps across. That was our ceremony and our law. I set a hand on the lintel where our names lived, felt the new cuts, and understood the shape of the rest of my days. Stay, build, ask, listen, choose, and then choose again at dawn. Outside, weather. Inside, home.